wondered what all things that we can recover if a sample is being burnt or charred? 8 out of 10 people believe that we cannot retrieve anything evidentiary out of it. But in the world of forensics, that's not true, as science believes on facts that are proved by research and analysis. We have called an expert who has served as a special agent in 27 years in the Bureau of Firearms, Explosives, and Arson related cases. He is currently working as a consultant and forensic investigator in the Gulf Coast Fire Investigation, Louisiana. He is associated with several associations and he has received various awards, and he has also given expert testimony several times. In this video, you are going to witness an informative talk related to the fire and arson cases between the forensic coroner and Mr. Robert J. Schaal.
Okay, I want to talk to you today about forensic fire investigation, just kind of give you an overview of what we do when we determine the origin and cause of fires. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss forensic fire investigation, and I'm going to use a couple of case studies to illustrate origin and cause process. And in the United States, we use a document called NFPA 921, which is a guide for fire and explosion investigations. NFPA stands for National Fire Protection Association. They're based out of Massachusetts, and it's a consensus guide developed by a group of people involved in fire investigation to kind of outline the science behind fire investigation. And then there's job performance requirements outlined in NFPA 1033, and that establishes the professional qualifications that we look for in the fire investigator. The purpose of fire investigation is kind of twofold. We want to prevent future occurrences of fires of similar nature. So if we determine the cause, we can evolve codes or instill safety practices. Therefore, we can prevent fires from occurring. We can educate the public. And if it is an intentional act, we want to hold people accountable. So that's the basic premise of fire investigation in general. It's a critical component of a fire department's fire prevention and safety initiative or programs, because if you don't know what caused fires, you can't prevent them. You can't evolve code. You can't educate your public on how to safely use appliances, how to behave in fires and whatnot. So it's a very important process, certainly on the public sector side. On the private sector side or the civil side, again, it gets into litigation support. And that's mainly what I do now. I do private fire investigations for insurance companies and the legal community. Some of the knowledge areas that NFPA 1033 says a fire investigator should have include fire science, fire chemistry, thermodynamics, thermometry, fire dynamics, this whole list. Basically, having knowledge in these specific areas helps you perform the job performance requirements that are outlined in Chapter 4 or another section of the document. The main premise of fire investigation, or the foundation, is the scientific method. And it's a systematic approach to problem solving, and it provides a framework for reaching sound conclusions. It's something that we use every day in decision making. Basically, what we do is we define what problem we have, what we need to solve, and then we collect information or gather data, and we analyze that data, see what kind of meets everything we're looking at, and then we form conclusions, and then we test those conclusions against our knowledge of fire investigation, publications. We may do actual test burns to determine something. And after we test something, if it doesn't hold up to the testing, then we go back, gather more data. We kind of circle around in this center section until we reach our final conclusion, which is our final hypothesis of the case. Again, when we collect information, physical evidence from the fire scene, witness statements, video surveillance, fire department alarm registers, fire suppression equipment response registers. All that's information we gather to use as we analyze a fire event. And then the logic and reasoning, theoretical modeling, practical testing, we're going to use that in the analysis and testing aspect of it before we reach our final conclusion. As we start gathering information and doing our analysis, that's where we start developing hypotheses and testing our hypotheses. It's in kind of an iterative process. We kind of circle around until we reach one sound final conclusion. One aspect that we do is, which most forensic sciences do this, they have a technical review. Somebody else reviews your work to make sure that you're reaching sound conclusions and you're reaching sound methodology. So it's just kind of a secondary review. And I think that's generally accepted within all forensic disciplines. So the importance of the process is making sure you get good information that you can analyze and you get all the pieces of the puzzle, so to speak, to make sure that you reach sound conclusions. Again, why do we use the scientific method? It kind of organizes our thought process. It gives us a clear framework to work with. Because it's spelled out in both NFPA 1033, which is the standard for professional qualifications, and NFPA 921, which is the guide for fire and explosion investigations, it enhances your credibility because you are using what the industry says you should use. It's a process that, again, it goes outside of fire investigation. It's a process that produces good results. And as I just mentioned, 921 and other references say that it's what we should use, and it's a foundation for legitimate conclusions. Some of the factors that we use to determine origin and cause, of course, is eyewitness statements, people that lived in a property or worked in a property, people that observed the fire event. We may have surveillance video or other electronic data, again, from, say, an in-house fire protection system. We use all of that information, and then we use fire patterns and fire dynamics, and we kind of use those, intermingling them to ultimately come up to a conclusion on where we think the fire started and then what potentially caused the fire. And why do we need fire dynamics? Why is that important? Because it's important for us to understand the properties of the fuel and how they are going to contribute to the fire event. You know, what are the ignition properties? What does it take to get it ignited so the fire process starts? What's the ignition temperature? What's the critical heat flux, or how much energy does it have to receive? What's its thermal inertia? How easy it is to ignite or how difficult it is to ignite? Does that first fuel that ignites have enough energy to transfer to a secondary fuel so you get your fire event going? And then when we look at the property, you know, what factors might include what factors might influence development in a particular fire? Again, the size and location of the ignition source, where it's in within a compartment, certainly affects that. If a fuel has more energy, it's going to lead to faster fire spread. Where a heat source comes in contact with a fuel can affect fire spread. If you ignite it at the top of a fuel item, it has to burn down, and that's a slower process than if you ignite it at the bottom and it burns up. So where the fuel, heat, and oxygen all came together in right circumstances for the uninhibited chain reaction that we call fire, that's certainly important. How the amount of fuel, the position of the fuel, the spacing of the fuel items, the orientation, surface area of the fuel packages, how they relate to each other certainly influences how a fire grows and develops. The geometry of the enclosure, does it have tall ceilings? Does it have doors and windows that allow for air entrainment because fire needs oxygen to burn? So where is it getting its airflow? Where are the hot smoke and gases exiting the compartment? These are all factors that are important as we analyze a fire for first origin, location, and then cause. The boundary surfaces of the compartment certainly can play. Is it a non-combustible surface? Does it accept the heat and transfer it outside of the compartment? Does it radiate that energy back into the compartment? Is it combustible? Does it burn? All of these are important factors that we want to analyze as we do our origin and cause investigation. So in a typical compartment, we're entraining air. We have our fire over here on the left-hand side of the screen. It entrains air. Hot buoyant gases convect upwards. As they convect upwards, they hit a ceiling or boundary, and then they start moving along that, building an upper layer. That upper layer radiates energy or transmits energy back down to other items within the room, raising them to potentially to their ignition temperature so they can be involved in the fire process. And then at the boundary surface, energy is conducted through the boundary surface and taken away. So we have all mechanisms of heat transfer going on in a typical compartment fire. As heat impacts items, it causes thermal decomposition. It causes it to break down the material into fuel gases that can then mix with oxygen and burn. It's an irreversible change. It has charring as a byproduct. It has moisture or water as a byproduct. And again, it reduces fuel gases, which ultimately mix with oxygen and burn. The process of breaking down something through heat is the process of pyrolysis. As heat impacts an item, it starts breaking down the molecules and again creating char, maybe water, and the fuel gases. It's breaking down the material by heat alone, and pyrolysis often precedes combustion. As items are impacted by heat, they start to lose mass, and whether it be a liquid where you're impacting with heat and it evaporates and those fuel gases then are available to mix with oxygen, or if it's a solid material like wood, where again, we break it down, it gives off fuel gases or vapors that mix with oxygen and burn. That mass loss can play an important factor when we are looking at where a fire started and how it progressed through a structure. It could be affected by two different things: the duration of exposure to heat or the intensity of the exposure. Both of those can affect the rate at which mass is lost. So as we're looking at a fire, a comparison of the mass loss on similar items can certainly give us some idea of where a fire started and how it progressed through a structure or a particular fuel item. And I'll go into that in a little more in depth as we go through our case studies here in a minute. So as we talked about, it can be duration or intensity. In this example, we exposed wood to the same heat source for a different amount of time. So on the left of the screen, you see 1.5 minutes, moving to the right at 6 minutes. You see as we increase the time, the greater amount of damage we have to the material. And conversely, intensity can also affect it. Here we have similar pieces of wood exposed 2 minutes at low heat, 2 minutes at high heat, and you see that greater intensity causes more mass loss or more damage to the material. Again, doubling the distance can the same thing as changing the intensity of the heat. You can see 2 minutes at twice the distance doesn't cause as much damage as the standard 2 minutes, and then 4 minutes, same thing. When we start taking this into a compartment, and this is an example of a test we did back when I was still with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which is a U.S. government agency responsible for fire investigation of commercial properties. We do these tests. So here we have a standard living room, which we burned, and then post-fire, we look at it, and if we look at this sofa, we can start noting that more mass loss is observed on the left side of the sofa than the right. We still have some of the foam padding. The wood support of this arm is missing, and we still have the wood support. So this is an indication that this side of the sofa either burn more intently or burn longer. Then when we start comparing it to the love seat, we kind of see the same thing. We see greater charring on the right side versus the left side, a little more mass loss of the padding material on the right side versus the left side. The arms on this side is not quite as damaged on this side. So now this gives us information to basically say, this is damaged more here, this is damaged more here. Maybe broadly, this area is where we want to look, and then we can start identifying potential heat sources that may have resulted in the fire. As heat and smoke products move through a fire, move through a compartment, I'm going to use a computer model to kind of illustrate it here. So this would be an example of how a fire progresses through a structure. You see, this compartment is where our fire started, but our hot smoke and byproducts move through the compartment, and they will start impacting the fuel items. They'll start impacting the boundary surfaces. So this is kind of a heat slice. So you can see the heat starts building up in this back compartment. We form a layer. It's flowing down. So this movement of hot smoke and gases through the compartment impacts the boundary surfaces, impacts the fuel items, and we kind of use all of that together to try and move back, again, first to the area of origin, and then ultimately to identify a potential fire cause. So as we get the fire burning here, we have it's hottest and deepest at the flame axis here, and then we get a stratification, a buildup of layering. But again, that movement of hot smoke and gases through the compartment impacts the environment, leaving patterns that we can then utilize to kind of hopefully trace the fire back to its origin.
So stay tuned with the Forensic Corner, and in the subsequent videos of Mr. Robert J. Schaal, you will get a hands-on learning with a 3D view of the crime scenes. So just like, share and subscribe to our videos. Thanks for watching.